Rock groups are among the most mythologized topics in the history of pop culture. While you could think of maybe a handful of authors under this description, I could easily think of a dozen rock bands from various eras that have, over time, fallen into legend. And not necessarily for their music, but for their public image. It could have been due to an enigmatic frontman or myths of studio tension, or maybe even both. Regardless, these iconic groups all remain different except for one feature. Their stories are begging to be capitalized upon. There's been plenty of books written on them, but one budding form of exploitation seems to be shockingly apparent in the form of rock biopics. Ah, rock biopics. They can either be one of the best things you've ever seen, or they can be absolutely horrible. But why is that, exactly? This video is going to focus on 3 films in particular, but I think there's lessons to be learned from all of them in just exactly what and what not to do. I think all 3 of these get some things right and some things wrong. Well, a lot of things wrong actually, but we'll get to that. Hopefully this list can shed some light on a lot of issues that have seemed to plague the genre for a while, and help you better understand a subjective yet comprehensive explanation of how— The Doors is what I like to call an unhealthy middle. It's right in the center of the road in terms of what you want out of a biopic of the band The Doors, but at times that's not necessarily a good thing. In preparation for this video, I watched both the theatrical and the final cut of this film, and from what I could tell, they're not too terribly different from each other, and they're both pretty easy to obtain, so I'll be talking about the final cut as it seems to be the closest to Oliver Stone's vision. When it comes to The Doors, I don't think there's a whole lot going on here. Not just thematically, I mean, there's literally just not much happening. It boasts an incredibly long runtime for the content within it, but when the credits roll, you look back and you think, did I even just watch a movie? One problem that plagues the genre of rock biopics is the attention to historical accuracy. The Doors is most certainly not that, going so far as to have the original band members come out and publicly discredit the film in the years since its release.
I read the script and walked out. I contributed to Oliver Stone up until the point when he delivered a script. I was completely shocked when I read the script. He's changed the facts. Why change the facts?
While that may come across as lazy or irresponsible, I wouldn't go so far as to call it that. I mean, The Doors is by no means a lazy film, and I think that the liberties taken with the script tie more heavily into the idea that I was talking about earlier in this video. This isn't a history of the band The Doors, this is a mythological account. Greek mythology is mentioned frequently throughout the film, in particular the Greek god Dionysus, god of fertility and insanity.
Everything's gonna flame, man. The planet is screaming for change, Morrison. We gotta make the myths.
While I'm not saying that portraying Jim Morrison as a shaman god was a necessarily respectful approach, I do think that it adds a lot to the tone that the film is trying to achieve. Frequent drug use and allusion to tripping on hallucinogenic drugs give the film an incredibly psychedelic and chaotic tone, which gives the whole thing a sort of experiential feel. Now, I'm not absolving the film of any criticism, it's still deeply flawed in many ways. The dialogue is cringe, the amount of celebrity name drops and cameos throughout the film is bordering on cartoonish.
Hi, I'm Nico.
And when you look at the film in whole, it's really just kind of boring. I think The Doors could be approached with the same philosophy that director Oliver Stone had, only truncated, and it could be something great. The negatives do not outweigh the positives for me, but the negatives are there just frequently enough for me to be distracted by them every time I watch it. The band gets almost no development throughout the film. The lens is certainly focused primarily on Morrison, played impeccably by Val Kilmer, in a performance that I think defined his entire career. But for a film called The Doors, you'd think that there'd be more in there about The Doors, right? One thing that I can compliment about the film, though, is its brilliant concert scenes. These often make or break rock biopics like this for obvious reasons. You can either be a genuine and rousing sequence, or you can look like a bunch of nerds LARPing in the street. I'd say that a majority of this film's runtime is devoted to concert scenes, most likely because most of them go on for a very, very long time, and just about every single one of them are incredible. While a lot of this can be accredited to the performers, I think one of the main reasons that these scenes stick out to me is because of cinematographer Robert Richardson, who would go on to shoot a majority of Quentin Tarantino's filmography. There's a lot of bloom to the lights, so much that it almost looks as though the lens is smudged, and it gives every scene a sort of mysterious, smoky room feeling. This works incredibly well in concert sequences like the one that takes place at the Whiskey A Go-Go Club early on in the film. The sound, the visuals, the music, it all ties together in such a poignant and memorable way, and I just wish that the rest of the film were like that. But Kyle MacLachlan is there, so I guess I can't complain too much.
Is this the real life?
Bohemian Rhapsody is like if you sat a film student down and told him to write an Oscar bait script based off of his dad's playlist. Yeah, this movie sucks, and not even in like a charming way where you watch it and you acknowledge that you're watching something bad but you're having fun. No, this movie is just horrible. How can a movie about Queen be done poorly? I mean, this could have been the trashiest, corniest, dumbest shit in the world and I would have loved it. And it is all those things, don't get me wrong, but what destroys this movie is its insistence upon itself. What I mean by that is that the film presents itself as though it's something important, that this movie is like an event or something, but it's really just a mediocre mess.
Are you joking? You were working at Heathrow before we gave you a chance?
You'd be a dentist, drumming 12/8-time blues at the weekend at the Crown and Anchor.
I mean, this shit reads like a first draft in crayon at times. It's so fast-paced and yet not all that long that by the time the film ends, you feel like you've run a marathon, but you haven't gotten anywhere. Characters are introduced, get 2 scenes of development, then disappear entirely. Part of me thinks that they were trying to go for more of an epic saga than a traditional biopic, but it's far too short and far too rushed to be anything but a bore. This movie struggles with similar problems that occur in The Doors, one of which baffles me to a point of no return. Nearly the entire film is completely devoid of any sort of historical accuracy whatsoever. I mean, it's flawed, but I overall like The Doors, and I can acknowledge that the canon of it leaves a lot to be desired. But with Bohemian Rhapsody, it's like they didn't even give a shit about Queen to begin with. Whether it be through the effort or the actual content, the other 2 films I'm talking about in this video feel like an independent vision from someone with a unique voice. Sometimes that doesn't exactly work out, and other times it does. This is a case where it most certainly doesn't work out, and the amount of effort is so low that I'd get more out of reading the plot synopsis than watching the actual movie. There's some style there, of course, but the film is overall very visually shabby. All the footage looks like any work done to the image was purely in camera, to the point where the colors are so muddy and uninteresting that the image is quite literally boring to look at. It isn't shot poorly, not by any stretch of the imagination, but good God is it stale. It's things like this, the awful script, the boring look of it all, that makes me wonder why they even bothered to make this movie in the first place. If you're making this film for fans of Queen, hell, if the people making it are fans of Queen themselves, why do I watch this and feel like most everyone involved just doesn't care? Watching this movie feels like you're going through a checklist. Like, okay, we gotta have the formation of the band, then we gotta have their first performance, then we gotta have their first album moment, using a song that was actually on their second album. The sequence of the band recording Bohemian Rhapsody is quite obviously fan service, but it's not the fan service element that bothers me. The part that bothers me is that while the sequence alone is pretty entertaining, the whole is less than the sum of its parts. So you have this movie, batting for awards, presenting itself as this immensely important event type of movie, but it just feels so soulless. Pretty much one of the only things that I can compliment about this movie is Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury. He truly is the one saving grace in this mountainous mess of a movie. Well, that and all the Queen music that is used, but that's not a compliment to this movie, it's a compliment to the 4 people that actually made it 40 years ago. I watch this and I see no passion, I see no vision, I see a product. I know that's like the #1 most pretentious thing to say about any movie, but it's true. I see Bohemian Rhapsody and I see a job for hire. Now, that's not me bashing directors for hire. Hell, Oliver Stone was picked after The Doors was already being developed. But Stone brought enough of his singular talent to the project that I feel as though the film could not have been made by anyone else without being dramatically different. With Bohemian Rhapsody, I feel like this could have been done by literally anyone and it would make no difference. There is not a shred of credibility here that makes this an interesting or necessary film. And Jesus Christ, don't even get me started on Brian. Meanwhile, on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, Rocketman is fucking, I just absolutely love every second of it with every fiber of my being. This is, and I cannot stress this enough, absolutely perfect. But Hayden, I hear you ask, nothing can be perfect, can it? Fuck you, bitch, this movie is. I'm being hyperbolic, of course, but I think this movie is a perfect example of what a rock biopic, hell, what a movie in general should be. Like its contemporaries that I discussed, Rocketman is helmed by a stunning and ultimately snubbed lead performance from Taron Egerton. Before this movie, I knew him as the Kingsman guy, which makes sense as that's by far the biggest IP he's been attached to, but it was also his first film. Rocketman takes his talent and puts it on full display. While the supporting cast is also tremendous, Egerton gives us a full-blown tour de force, and on top of that, he's also just a very talented singer.
Anyway, here's one for all the sober people.
If you haven't seen the film, this is not a biopic so much as it is a musical. The songs of Elton John are used in a jukebox fashion to fit the tone, not so much the timeline. This is an automatic fix to one of the biggest issues from The Doors and Bohemian Rhapsody. Those two films are linear and therefore chronological. The songs are placed around where they should have already existed. The only problem with that is that they weren't. I mean, for Christ's sake, Love Street played before they even became a band in The Doors? Don't even get me started on Bohemian Rhapsody, I mean, Jesus fuck. What Rocketman does, instead of taking the approach of a traditional narrative, is use the songs to tell its story. It is through and through a musical. Characters sing and dance along to all the big Elton John hits, and it just works so well. I love the elasticity that this approach allows for. You can have a 10-year-old Elton singing Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting because it's being used in a thematic way and not a canonical one. The musical fantasy elements also tie in very well with the framing device of the film, Elton reflecting on the history of his life, his own songs reflecting and defining these periods. It's just absolutely brilliant. I've seen this film probably close to 10 times, and I don't think a single viewing has gone by where I haven't cried like an absolute baby, both out of joy and out of sadness. Each musical number is a headfirst dive into the euphoric. They bring me so much joy that I end up watching the entire film with a stupid grin on my face just about every time I sit down to watch it. What's really fascinating about this, though, is that they use the different songs to their advantage to portray different periods in Elton's life. I Want Love is used to depict Elton's troubled upbringing with having two absent parents, while Benny and the Jets is used to further exemplify his future life of excess and addiction. This may not be the intention of the lyrics when the songs were originally written, but the ways that they so tightly wrap the music to the narrative is fucking genius. But it's not as though this is just some dumb comfort film to me, and that's why I like it so much. It tells the story of Elton John's life in a really respectful and really entertaining way. This is the only film in this list that doesn't have a runtime of over 2 hours, and yet Rocketman gets so much more done in that time than either of the other films did. It perfectly illustrates his rise to fame, his struggles with sexuality, his addictions, his excess, his downfall. All of it is encapsulated and portrayed so perfectly that I literally don't know how to cohesively talk about this film without gushing like a child. Which I admittedly have just done, but I'll stand by it to the day that I die. Rocketman is, from start to finish, a downright amazing film. So I've discussed these films in relative detail, but I'm yet to actually come up with a point. What is the point of the last 2,000 odd words? Well, the point is this. Biopics are hard to make. It's a delicate balance to tell the story of someone's real life. How much can you embellish and rearrange a life without offending those close to the person? I simply don't know, and frankly I don't know if anyone does. We don't know the true feelings of most of the people involved with these movies, or those involved with the true events that they were based off of. It's simply not up to me to tell you how to make a perfect biopic. That being said, here's how to make a perfect biopic. Step 1. For the love of God, unless you're doing a jukebox musical or some subsequent variant like Rocketman, get your goddamn timelines correct. Step 2. Converse with the relatives of the members of the band, or even the members themselves, to try and get the most faithful yet most engaging experience possible. I can't speak for anyone else, but the fact that the remaining members of the Doors resent the movie certainly impacts the way that I look at it. Step 3. Have fun. experiment with the form. Biographies can be really, really boring, and feeding into the void of personality that is a by-the-books Clint Eastwood-style biopic could risk the integrity of absolutely everything. The main goal of these rock biopics is to attempt and capture the spirit of the bands and their music, and to introduce this incredible music to a new generation. Some succeed, some fall flat on their face. It's entirely in the hands of the beholder. But please, for the love of God, don't let that beholder be Bryan fucking Singer. I mean, are you kidding me?
Come on, come on, come on, come on, now touch me, babe. Can't you see that I am not afraid? What was that promise that you made? Why won't you tell me what she said? What was that promise that you made? Now I'm gonna love you till the heavens start.